Today on The Nation Speaks, if you object to getting a COVID-19 vaccine for religious reasons, you can apply for an exemption. But if you work with the federal government, you've also been added to a database. Matt Staver, chairman of the Liberty Counsel, says there's no good reason to keep lists. And in America Q&A, we ask if any of your habits have changed as inflation drives prices up and up. Next, states fed up with federal government overreach are teaming up. If they get to 34, they can hold a convention aimed at amending the Constitution. Sounds like a long shot, but the movement is halfway there, as we hear from Mark Meckler, president of Convention of States Action. Finally, in our second America Q&A, we ask for reactions on how the Canadian government handled the truckers' protest. Hello and welcome to The Nation Speaks. I'm your host, Cindy Drucare. In theory, government workers can apply for religious exemption to vaccine mandates if they have a sincerely held religious objection. In practice, though, exemptions have been very few and far between. In the military, for example, as of February 24th, the Air Force had approved 13 requests, the Marine Corps 3, the Navy 1 conditional approval, and the Army 0. There are many lawsuits in play across the country, but this week the Supreme Court declined to take a case launched by Maine healthcare workers. Meanwhile, it's also come to light that the federal government is tracking people who apply for exemptions. With us to tie all of these threads together is Matt Staver, chairman of the Liberty Counsel, the legal group behind many of these lawsuits. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
This is a little bit complicated, but extremely important. I wonder, can you explain to us the specifics of who's creating this database and what is it for?
Well, the database began with the United States Army. They're not only tracking their exemptions, but they're monitoring them, and these are now going to be continually archived in the National Archives. That is the first entity that we know of that began tracking, but now there's 55 federal departments and agencies that have promulgated 57 rules. Most of these rules have been done on a, quote, emergency basis, so they've bypassed the typical public comment, and most of those are in effect now. 55 departments and agencies. And so what are they tracking? They're tracking individuals, particularly employees, but not exclusive to those employees. Could be contractors, it could be guests, could be visitors, could be people attending an event sponsored by one of these departments that have asked for a religious exemption. You have to ask yourself the purpose of these. Why do they need to have this permanent database that will be archived in the National Archives on a permanent record? There is no real good answer to that, but they are tracking not only whether you applied for a religious exemption, but even your doctrinal views, even kinds of conversations or verbal information that they may obtain through this process, including information from your clergy and your particular doctrinal or church or synagogue beliefs. It's very intrusive, and it is quite extensive, and it has happened within the last year.
Who has access to this, and what do you think they can do with this information?
Well, in some cases, the rules say that have been promulgated by these 55 departments and agencies that they can share it with other entities, other federal entities, for example, or other places as necessary. They can, for example, share it with someone outside of the federal government, including state, local, and international governmental agencies. So it doesn't have any parameters on how they can handle this, what are they going to do with it, and who they can share it with. The real question is, why do they need this? Why all of a sudden during this administration do we need to track every single person who asked for a religious exemption? How can it be used against those individuals? Well, certainly they can be used against the employees of the federal government wanting to transfer to another agency or department, perhaps as a career advancement or a different change of positions. They can look at that database and part of that transfer in reviewing somebody. And if they have a religious exemption, they can just simply be denied. You may not know that's why you're being denied, but that's part of the database that the place would be looking at. Not only that, if you wanted to transfer into the private market, you might be able to get tracked there.
The national emergency declared on March 13, 2020 to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic isn't over yet. It was due to expire Tuesday, but President Biden has now extended it beyond March 1st, 2022, with no mention of an end date, writing, "It is essential to continue to combat and respond to COVID-19 with the full capacity and capability of the federal government." During the 2 years of this emergency, the federal government has greatly expanded the scope of its activities, powers, and spending. And now the pushback. It's taking many forms, and one of them is a growing momentum around the idea of holding a convention of states to amend the Constitution to curb federal powers. Wisconsin and Nebraska are the latest two states to officially join the call for a convention, bringing the total now up to 17. That's the halfway mark to the 34 states that are needed to hold the convention. It's a bit of a radical idea in that it's never happened before, but Article 5 of the Constitution does allow for it. We have with us today Mark Meckler, the main driving force behind this movement. He is the president and co-founder of the Convention of States Action. Mark, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I think we had better start with you giving us Convention of States 101.
Sure. I think this is important. A lot of people don't know about this because it's a little used, in fact, never used portion of the Constitution. Article 5 gives us the methods by which we can propose amendments. We have 27 amendments to the Constitution. All of them have been proposed by the first method in the first clause of Article 5. That's when 2/3 of Congress proposes something, it goes out to the states for ratification by 3/4 of the states. What we're doing is using the second clause of Article 5. When 2/3 of the states, today that would be 34 states, call for a convention for the same purposes, the states then convene, they discuss potential amendments. If they can get 38 states to agree, those amendments become suggestions to the states, and they go out for the same sort of ratification. It takes 38 states, 3/4 of states, to ratify anything that might be proposed out of convention. And today what's being proposed is what's called a subject matter convention. There are 3 subject matter areas. The convention will discuss anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, like a balanced budget amendment, anything that would impose term limits on federal officials, and that would include, by the way, staffers, bureaucrats, and the judiciary, and anything that would include scope and jurisdiction restraints on the federal government. That would be things like telling them, no, you can't be involved in healthcare or the environment or education, things that were never intended for the federal government.
Right now, there are 17 states who have signed on, and you need 34 for the convention to be convened. We'll just put up the map here of the states you have on board so far, those that have passed resolutions in at least one of their houses and those that are discussing it. How do you expect to get to 34? What's the math here?
Yeah, I think just to give you a couple of quick points coming up here shortly, we passed out of a South Carolina Senate committee this week, and we've already passed out of the House. So we're on our way to passage in South Carolina. West Virginia, we're moving right now. We expect movement there and probably passage in the next couple of weeks. We've already passed the Senate there several times. We look good in the House this year. Ohio looks good. Pennsylvania looks good. Iowa looks good. Kansas looks good. So there's a lot of movement happening this year. The path to 34, another 17 states, is primarily lined with states that have both houses of the legislature controlled by Republicans. Today, that's 31 states have both houses controlled by Republicans. If you count Virginia, they have one house controlled by Republicans now. That will likely flip in 2023. I think that takes you to 32 states. Minnesota has one house controlled by Republicans. I think that will flip in the next election. That would take you to 33. And I think there are a couple of other states that are becoming battleground states for the state legislature. I would say Nevada is probably top of the list there. So I think we could see 34 states with both houses controlled by Republicans no later than 2024.